Greetings, Bumakapa TV viewers, and welcome to Iron Art. I am Hlumelu January, your host for tonight's show. Today, we are at the Anthenium interviewing a local mind by the name of Rez Nyanzi. Wow, Mzwanele Chishonga, a creative photographer all the way from KwaZakele here in Gqeberha, who'll be talking to us about ubugqirha, ubungoma, in his exhibition called Umoya. Ukulandela umoya. And as said, we are here at the Anthenium with the creative for today, a photographer and a local mind from KwaZakele himself, Rez Nyanzi. Hi Rez, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm great, thanks. So Rez, let's just get started. Let's jump into things. Please just tell us, inform us, how you got here, how you got to be on the walls of the Anthenium, and how you established yourself as a creative.
Sure. So, yeah, I'm a Port Elizabeth-based photographer, and I've been practicing for about 5 years now as a photographer, professional photographer. I'm an alumni of the Market Photo Workshop. So the work that you see here was part of a mentorship program that took about 8 months to develop. It was developed across different parts of the Eastern Cape, and it was initially supposed to be shown in Johannesburg. But I think after creating the work in the Eastern Cape, it was quite important to have it reflected here. So yeah, the collaboration with the space happened via the Mandela Bay Development Agency. They showed quite a keen interest in the work and offered the gallery space, and I think like that we managed to have the showcase here. But yeah, it was part of an 8-month mentorship where I was rigorously developing work alongside a mentor, traveling between the Eastern Cape and Joburg just to build this body of work.
Wow, incredible. We can clearly see that a lot has been invested from, it being hung up, it being acknowledged as it is, but also the work itself speaks for itself. So please do tell us mainly your subject matter. I can see a lot of influence from the Xhosa culture. So please just go into that. Why, out of everything that you could have documented with your gift, what particularly pushed you, to talk about the things that you talk about in your work?
Sure. So the work we're looking at right now is Ukulandela Umoya 2. It's a continuation of a body of work that looks at ubungoma or ubugqirha as a way of understanding this vast concept kamoya. It's not something that I feel was pre-planned. I just started making pictures in the spaces. It was firstly around family. And when I looked at the works, I felt like they communicated something deeper than just all the other images I was making. I then decided to go to school to kind of understand how to use photography as a tool to tell narratives. And it was there where I actually found out that you could actually tell a narrative using pictures. You could have a story that stretches over a number of years that doesn't only focalize technical ability, but also storytelling. And I feel this was the most natural for me because it's like we travel to Joburg in Cape Town to consume art, but a lot of it is created here. So I think it was important for me to also photograph here, to also create the work here so that the engagements can happen. Because I mean, in some of the parts, I'm in rural parts of the country, and people want to know, where's the work going? What are you going to do with the work? And as a weird side effect, I call it, you are actually educating people. And so as much as I was receiving from the spaces, I'd also make it a point to leave something in the spaces, mainly the knowledge of photography as an art form that we can use to tell stories.
Wow. Wow, so very well spoken. I'm so taken aback by that. Well, I just want to say that I really think that your whole, you made a point about focusing not only at photography through technically, but also looking at it as creatively. And I really think that's something that the masses lack information, on. And so I love that yours, you being local and being around and just being an example for us people, balapha eGqeberha, that, one of our own can actually do such and create such and get acknowledged and recognized, and every bit deserve it. Okay, so please do tell us, what do you have in store for the future? What are your future aspirations or in plan, or what do you aspire to do going from here onwards?
Yeah, I think this was an interesting point in my life. I've never had a solo exhibition, so to have it in my hometown was quite critical. But when I look at the work, it feels like it would fit more in a book. The work is up on the walls for 30 days and it comes down. but there's a permanency that comes with books that cannot be easily eradicated. So I'm ideally looking at a way of packaging this work in a print form, but also creating some more work, because I feel like there's missing parts. There's still parts I'd like to develop. But yeah, the final output would definitely be a book. But apart from this work, I mean, there's other bodies of work that I'm working on, and a lot of them are based in the Eastern Cape. So ultimately, I think my goal is exactly what you're saying, to make photography as an art form visible in the Eastern Cape and respected, because you don't really get that here as you do everywhere else. And that's why it was important to kind of insist. So the future holds a lot of insisting further in terms of holding public programs here, having talks, having workshops, having exhibitions, to really engage photography in a much broader aspect. Yeah.
Well, I love that. I love that so much. I truly just appreciate how you went into saying you want this to create, to be a form of like permanency, you know, put it in a book. And I really, as somebody who loves books, I really cannot agree anymore, because really it never gets old, it never runs out, and it's forever there, you know, to be acknowledged, to inspire, for future references and for past. So in regards to what you hope to do in the future, you know, any ideas on what you would do differently from experiences that you've and challenges that you faced previously?
Not so much differently, you know. I think the work kind of has its own voice, and sometimes you need to allow that. And I think all projects have that element. For me, I think I would have loved to extend this experience, you know, to take it from where we are in the city, because we're in PE, but we're in the city, to have this work shown where I stay, where people don't have to catch a taxi or bus to see it. So I think for me, it's also that element that's lacking. The art is not visible in our communities. You know, people have to travel to the universities, travel to the galleries, and that in a way creates a big disconnect. So if there's anything that I think I'd love to do in future, is to have more of these in the hood, you know, have more of these ekasi, where people can walk, where things can just remain hanging even if you're not there, and children can engage with it. Because the people that are photographed here, some of them were able to come. Some of them don't even live here. So to really take the work back to the people, as opposed to having it packaged for like an audience that understands art in a particular way, I think art is for all of us. Yeah.
That's so well spoken. And instead of having it, you know, in one place for, you know, a particular audience, but also having, as a muse, be reflected and be seen and see yourself as the creative behind the camera saw you. So, guys, it's been great talking to Rez, but we will be here seeing his work further and getting to know it even deeper. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back right here on Iron Art. And welcome back from the ad break. We're still here at the Anthenium with Urez Nyanzi, and now he will be taking us through his work to further tell us the story behind Umoya. Please take it away.
Sure, thanks. So, yeah, I'll just try and explain briefly. This is not the correct order, but it works. The story is cohesive enough for us to make sense of it. So, yeah, I think part of learning photography was learning suggestions. So photography is always known as such a literal thing. You know, I can show you a picture as proof. But I think for me it was like, what happens when you zone in? So instead of having the entire body of the people holding the goat, what does it imply when it's just the hands? What does it imply when you see the beads being wrapped around her wrist? And I mean, it's talking about something that's invisible, Ukulande Lumoya, it also suggests a level of insanity, because you're following something that's intangible. But the tangibility comes from understanding how small little things suggest Umoya. How even though, yes, beads came via a colonial regime, how we've been able to redefine them and use them to claim our culture is something that only black people can do, you know. So I think this was in Tanzania. As I've mentioned, I traveled a lot, and it was also the first time I was making this work ekasi. A lot of the times this is Lalin, and I think it robs us of something, of acting like these experiences are exclusive to particular parts, whereas they exist everywhere. It's who we are. So it was important for me to be a Lokshini And also very important to collaborate. Sisandla Skaspuxolo is, so I was in her home, nabazali bakhe, during the entire process. And it also speaks to what brought the image about. So photography is not just about me arriving and taking the picture. Long before that, I've built relationships that create a form of comfort that when I'm in the space and I'm making images, nothing about me is alarming. Nothing about me throws people off, you know. So yeah, and also the medium that we printed on is called dye bond. It's actually an aluminium surface. And I think it really does something phenomenal for how the works look. I mean, I could have went with traditional matte paper, but like this different glossy feel that you get as you orbit around the images really creates such a feeling. It helps the work move or move you to where it needs to. Yeah, so. Oh, okay. Yeah, so the goat image is also made at the same ceremony. But I think Ngumpendulo, igama legoat le, it got a name, which was also quite interesting, that people look at, I suppose, ukxhela as slaughtering, and they're not the same. Because this being has been considered, this being was given a name, and it's supposed to open the path into something bigger in her life. And interestingly enough, you know, the images standing close to one another communicated a message, you know, just the figure around the hands and the symbolic things that are used, the micimbini, to get us closer to iminyanya. So it's also that as you photograph within space, certain connections happen without you realizing. Because I didn't photograph thinking about hanging these pictures like this. But when I went back to them, something about them said, these two work together. You know, these two are meant to be together. And it's also quite ironic that they were photographed in the same place, on this, not the same day, different days. But yes, umoya omnye. Yeah.
This is one of my favorites.
Sure.
So please do explain this.
Okay, so this image was made Kuchuchuchu. That's a village, a lady Fre. I was honored to be there under Ubab Chawe, who's on the following images. He's an elder who has welcomed me into his space and spaces where he works. And I suppose he's really helped me with the work, because photographing izinto zabagqirha is very frowned upon. There's a secrecy and I suppose a sacred energy that moves with it. But for him to understand what I was trying to do, for him to understand that I'm not here to cause any malice, but to really try and unpack our own stories in our own way, was quite important for the work to develop, and I'd just like to thank him for that. So I was with him here, and I think what makes this image quite important for me is the absence of people, but the presence of human interaction with the space. So thinking about how, even without seeing the people, the ramifications of isiko can remain in the homesteads for weeks after. I mean, nobucinga ngento yoba kuhlwayelwe amazimba after umcimbi. It's a similar concept. You walk into that yard knowing that recently something was done for iminyanya. So this image was very important, but also it was an environmental portrait. So to really think about the spaces where I frequent, to not always have it zoomed in, but to step back a bit and consider space and how our own interactions collaborate with the space, how then that makes an other. And also thinking about the idea of umshwamo, you know, sacred food that's set aside for family, as that is what is seen there. And I remember someone asking me, what does it mean to photograph this? Because this is such a sacred space within every family, that some people feel some type of way. But I'm just like, we sometimes mysticize izinto unnecessarily. The impact of colonialism has made us so afraid to talk about ourselves that we think everything should be a secret. But apha kuza ilali, it's people of the village that get to experience this. So it's not something that's done in secrecy. So me photographing it doesn't change that. I'm not imposing something different on the space. I'm also a spectator. The only difference is I have a camera in my hand. Yeah, so it's also one of the few color images in the series, which is quite interesting. A lot of the work manifests itself in black and white. But I think this had to be in color, just the different tonal ranges that you see as you look at the image. The color does something as opposed to what I think a black and white image would have done. Yeah.
Well, when I was talking about this work, Therese, I mentioned how I really loved how, he captured it. This is a centralized composition artwork. But what I love about it is that you have all of these lines just kind of leading to this focal point, and how red is a complementary color of green, and how it's at the center of everything and there's so much green around it. It's such a statement piece. And the fact that he was able to capture that, it literally took me home. It was like such a sight. And he had mentioned something that, the absence of humans kind of made one be able to relate to it. The same way I am able to look at it and see such a familiar setting, such a setting where it looks like I walked into my own yard ending when there is a ceremony and, I'm supposed to go take the dishes and go wash them back. It feels like something we can relate to. And it's so rare seeing art that, us as individuals, we can see and we can almost say we've been there. So it's truly nice having art that not only reflects what we are, what we could be, but who we are already. So thank you very much. Continue, please.
Yeah, so I was here with this elder. This is one person, Ubab Chawe. And I think even with him, I mean, there's small little things that people won't think about. So it's quite sensitive to have cameras, komkhulu. A lot of people don't allow that. So even as he allowed me, as a form of respecting him, I protected his identity. So in a lot of the images, you don't see his exact face, but you see what he's doing. You see the act, because for me, the reason this was important, it highlights the relationships that we have with nature. That on your healing journey, the center points that you are taken to are all nature points, whether uyofukama ehlathini, whether uyofukama emlanjeni, or ndithengetheni, or komkhulu. All of these things are in essence parts of nature. So I felt it would have been an injustice to keep these images domesticated, to keep them in a domestic setting. So it was part of the negotiation to say, how do I come along, And while I was there, consciously thinking, how do I not intrude on the space? How do I not photograph in such a way where if other healers walk in here, they say, hey, Chawe, when's the land? But it's more of a thing of, it's symbolic. This could be any healer doing this act to, so this is that act. And for me, it was just hinting that, not really having this as a documentary moment. So it's not so much about who is there, but like what is happening in the moment, And this entire idea of reflection, as above, so is below. So it was quite interesting that it looked like ibhekile yona le ayiphethe also kuyagalelwa on the other side. Yeah, and I think that also suggests the symbiotic relationship we have nezinyanya. We always talk to them in a tone yoba mabasincede, but we don't realize that ngobukho bethu apha nathi siyabanceda. We give them bodies to be able to manifest themselves, to be able to manifest the dreams they couldn't fulfill. And I think that moment there encapsulates that. And again, man, just this interesting relationship, because I think these two are also like those together. And it's the same insisting on nature and man in nature, and how ubungoma is really a return to that. It's one of the ways that umntu is awakened, the conscience yakhe yoba, live in harmony with where you are. If this land gives you your food, it gives you your herbs, it gives you space to practice your rituals, it's quite important that you consider it and respect it. So a focal conversation, I suppose, in this work, but also in our country, is land. Access to land, where can we do it, where do people do this in the city? Milambo, are they clean? So there's so many nuances that we can go into as we analyze the images, but I think at the point of creation, they are not always there. So it creates this idea that the work speaks back. As much as you put into the work, when you give it a chance, it also tells you what you are trying to do. Sure.
So very well spoken. I really love one thing is all of this like negative space within the images, how the individuals are particularly on the side of the images. I love how it kind of like implies that it's all about the nature, as you had said. It's all about what is being documented. It's not about the individual. And so many, as humans, it's human nature. We make everything about us. And so I really like how there's emphasis on what is being done and what is being used, you know, instead of, and even the whole process, instead of whom is the individual doing it, you know. And so that whole taking away the individualism also creates the sense of it can be anyone, you know, doing it. And it truly makes you respect just how something as a picture can evoke and create so many stories, so many questions. And that is the purpose of art, isn't it?
So I think this is one of my favorite pieces of the series, mainly because it really does what I say I'm trying to do well, which is suggest. So this is an image of a single person, but photographed at a very slow speed as they were singing. And it creates this multiple effect of the same person. And I feel like that's suggestive of the fact that as much as we exist in the here, we exist in multiple layers. And it is those layers normally that call us to these spaces, that call us to follow these things. So when this image was made, I firstly even liked it in color because you can see the night sky. But something about the black and white made it about the figure, where everything else kind of moved to the backdrop and you don't kind of get excited by the colors, but you kind of make sense of the form as to what we're looking at. And this is quite an interesting way to work with the camera because I don't think cameras were designed to work like this. So in a sense, you are also testing the camera's limitations. You are trying to see how you can make it a poetic device. So instead of having a point and shoot, the images are very much more intentional. I consider light, I consider the time of day, and it's a matter of saying, I think this would do magic. And I think that's where the schooling element of photography came in, you know. Before school, I don't think I would have taken an image like this. Probably would have done all the other stuff. But like really getting trained on what the camera can do as a mechanism for us to understand it the same way painters understand their brushes and the different canvases. It really allows us to tap into a language that's not easily accessible. It allows us to say more with the limited resource of what's there and what I have. But it's like so much more is said within the single frame. And this idea of, yes, we're looking at still images, but there's movement, which is what Umoya is.
Wow, so very well spoken. I can't get enough of this guy, but we'll be talking more about his work. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back right here on Iron Art.
So one of the elements of the exhibition was a projection piece. There was a big feeling that images are a bit limiting. So in all the spaces that I'd been traveling, I was also shooting a bit of video to compile something that suggested what was going on these spaces, in the spaces, over and above the images rather. So these were projected onto Ingawe here behind me, which is seen as a cultural statement for Xhosa people. It's used a lot in Ngabangoma. It's one of those things that you'll find in a lot of spaces as Namagqirha. So for me to project on top of it as well felt a bit controversial when I heard people's responses, because it was a question of how dare you, you know? And for me, it's this interesting dance of, but these things are bought in the store, you know, the availability of them. What does that imply? And how is it that we do work that still speaks to it? It's seen as us disrespecting, you know? So I think art has a lot of controversy around it, and photography is not any different, you know. By having installation pieces in the space, I received a bit of a resistance, but I think this was healthy resistance. This was a point of engagement, talking about what I was trying to get across, but also how it made people feel in real time. And I think that's why I think the work traveling would do so much more of that. And I wouldn't say there's a final message per se. Ultimately, I think I would love to change the perception that we have of ourselves. I'd love to impact what we think about African spirituality. You know, if you were to Google or YouTube African spirituality, a lot of the videos that come out are quite controversial. Amagqirha and Izangoma are always painted in such a negative light. It's become synonymous with Muti killings. It's become synonymous with all these other things that don't really speak to the essence of who we are. So my quest with this work is to really highlight the beauty of isiko lethu, the beauty of ingulo, and the irony in that it's such a painful thing for the people that go through it, but it's such a beautiful thing as it culminates and comes back around to assist us in healing. Thanks.
If you would like to be on the other side of the screen, please make sure to contact us at Mpumakapa TV on all social media platforms or email us at content@mpumakapa.tv. I have been Hluveli January, your host for tonight. Good night.